is starting. Let's see here. Yeah, I think now. Yeah, now we are on. We just started on YouTube. We are live. So good luck, good work. It's with you, Franciele. You have the lead. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Edgar Konnichiwa. And hello, everybody. Hello, Jan. Good to see you again. Good evening for you in Finland now. Hello also to all our participants, our attendees. I'm very happy to be with you in the speak session. We have more 1 minute to start this session formally. So hello for everybody and welcome to this speak session. So just wait a minute here. So in the following 1 hour, we have the opportunity to discuss a very interesting topic, and you are more than welcome, all of you, to let your comments and questions on the chat room. So then after the presentation moment, we have opportunity to discuss this question also. Okay. I'm following some comments over here. Okay, guys, we are on time. So let me introduce you, Professor Ian Pfister, our guest speaker today. Ian Pfister is a senior lecturer at the Department of Accounting and Finance in Turku School of Economics in Finland, and a research fellow at the House of Innovation in Stockholm School of Economics too. He also worked at Lancaster University Management School and University of Zurich. He has been a visiting researcher at University of California at Berkeley and Lancaster University. He is involved in research projects and in international collaboration that focus on a range of topics related to management, control systems, design and practices, innovativeness also, and performance. He is also interested in a broader societal change based on emergent innovative technologies using qualitative field research methods, and has published in a high-ranked journals. For example, the Accounting Review and Scandinavian Journal of Management. So thank you again, Ian, for joining us at Congress USP, even virtually. Yeah, feel free to introduce yourself and to conduct your presentation. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much for the nice introduction, and also thanks for welcoming me virtually. So I'm in Finland, it's evening here, and I know you have a very busy conference in the second day. So I will now share my slides and then start. So the topic that I would like to talk about in the next hour is accounting and control during times of high uncertainty. And I think as we are all at the moment experiencing around the world, there is a lot of uncertainty going on, and that of course affects accounting and control. And that is something I would like to talk about. My background, well, Franciele has actually already mentioned all these places that I have been. I am from Switzerland originally, and that's where I have done my PhD. And during the time of my PhD, I have been spending 2 years in the US, in California, and also done field research during that time. And that was actually around the time of the financial crisis, the last time there was a big turmoil in the world. And what my PhD studies were about actually was a topic that is kind of between management accounting and financial accounting, because the interest was in how can managers, especially financial managers, create a culture in an organization that enhances effective internal control, so that basically there is no corruption happening, or that kind of controls, compliance procedures, financial reporting, and also operations, that they work effectively. As this was a topic at the time of importance, and I have spent quite some time on thinking about this, and this was also related then to management accounting and control, because the output of that theory or of that book was a control framework, how managers can manage the culture to have effective controls, and was built on Swiss companies, like people from Credit Suisse, but also US companies, including Microsoft, Google, Levi Strauss, HP. So several managers were involved in this. And that was a time when I started appreciating field research, qualitative field research. From there, I moved on now in the meantime. And that brings me to the topic of high uncertainty. As we said at the beginning, well, there is at the moment COVID-19 and this crisis, which I think, especially also in Brazil, is of really high importance, and people are affected by this. And it creates uncertainty on the one hand on the individual level, that basically individuals have to think about survival or about how to avoid illnesses. And on the other hand, it has also an effect on, of course, companies of all sizes, of smaller companies and larger companies, but some of the companies are more resilient to this than others, and that creates a high uncertainty. And here, just a bit to give an overview of what that uncertainty means for different industries. This is a survey that has been conducted by Boston Consulting Group with, I think, more than 160 CFOs, actually from countries from the US, from Europe and Asia. So South America was not much involved, but we can get a good idea here when we look at the effects of this. So on the left side, on the y-axis, you see the average expected sales impact 2020 that these CFOs think about. And on then the other side, you see the average expected profit impact. And retail, transportation, automotive are industries that are really impacted by this. And then many industries here in the center expect a large impact on this. And of course, then you have also some companies and industries that profit from this, like telecommunications, obviously, and also food and staples retailing, as you can order your food. And I heard that this is also quite common in Brazil, that you at the moment order your food at home, as Franciele, for example, told me. But that is not all if we think about uncertainty, because if we think a few months back, before actually COVID-19 was there, we have already an increased rate of change over many years. And this we can trace back to things like market competition. And market competition is not anymore local, so not anymore in just Brazil as a country or in different regions, but it is often nowadays global for different markets. And that creates more intensity and also a higher rate of change. So therefore, there is rapid and disruptive technological change happening in many industries. The goal nowadays is not to keep an industry stable, but the goal is how to disrupt an industry. Increased rates of knowledge transfer, so ideas travel through social media and other means very quickly. And there is an intense rivalry and new entrants in very complex ecosystems. Continuously renewed and quickly outdated business models. And that means companies and managers have to think about how to create value, but also how to capture value in innovative ways and to adapt their business model. For example, now during COVID, COVID-19, how can you change your business model to adapt to this situation? Then we have changing customer tastes, and we have also talent and employee mobility, as nowadays, well, we can travel around and move into different places, and that is also something that increases the rate of change. But not all, that's not all. It goes on. We have deregulation, regulation, we have security issues, we have trade wars, we have volatile pricing, financial downturns, environmental disasters, political instabilities. So we have all kinds of things going on. And that leads to discontinuities, disruptions, convergence, and intensity, and new sources of global competition. And some people, or some researchers call this, it's hyper-competitive. So competitive advantage is only temporary, and companies have to deal with this uncertainty, turbulence, and change. So that's about the situation that I wanted to talk about, this high uncertainty. And what this now means for companies is, I give here an example from PricewaterhouseCoopers that has a study, COVID-19 US CFO Pulse survey, which is based on 288 respondents in May. And they asked, what about the current situation will make your company better in the long run? And now if we look at this, what came out is better resiliency and agility is a key thing. Then a second one is work flexibility. So how and where do you work? How many hours? Where is the location? Then technology investments and leaner operations are key. So, and that shows something important here is this leads to digital technologies. So much of this has to do with innovation and digital technologies. And that is key here. And I want to, for a moment, think about digital technologies and what they do, and also why they have actually some kind of ambivalent role that we should consider. One is, well, digital technologies create connectivity. Like we are now able to have this conference despite the situation, which is a great thing, right? We are all connected, even though we don't really physically see each other, but kind of a bit. There is the possibility for automation, so we can improve processes by automation and make them more secure. There are all kinds of things going on, like big data, artificial intelligence, and other technologies that are in the development. Then we have augmentation, so we can augment tasks through technology, which again improves how we perform them. And of course, what a key thing is in all this is that it speeds up. So we can do things faster, more efficient, and this is in a capitalist system, which makes sense, right? We want to be faster and more efficient to get things done. It also helps to be more flexible, since again, I think this conference is the best example. It gives you the flexibility to do things in a different way. And I think I could go on with many functional benefits that digital technologies offer. So there are many more, but I think these are some of the key ones. But then there is also this other side of digital technologies, which some have maybe some fear about, or that also raise some concerns. And one of them, of course, is this replacing humans with machines. So yeah, it's nice when digital technologies do our work, but are we then kind of not necessary anymore? And that raises a key concern. Another one is if the processes, the work procedures speed up due to technology, automation, augmentation, things we can do things faster, which means also it creates pressure on people to do things in a faster way. And therefore there's especially in sociology, there is a discussion about, well, there is more rush and hurriedness in people. And I think many of us experience this, that in this world that we are always busy and that we have to get things done very, very fast, and many things approach us at the same time. So therefore, higher expectations through this speeding up of the world. Good, so this was about digital technologies, and basically my research has most often to do with digital technologies and how this changes things. And this talk or presentation, I have 4 questions, key questions that I would like to solve. The first one is, what are the implications of this for accounting? Second, what are the implications for management control systems? Third, what are the implications for emerging markets and countries? And the fourth one is, what are the implications for research and practice out of all this that we discussed? And I would like to approach those questions based on field research that I have been doing during the last few years and that I'm actually currently also working on. So that's what I'm going to do now. And well, the first one is implications for accounting. And if you think of accounting, well, accounting has many standardized processes, and these standardized processes can, of course, be automated. And therefore, probably you are aware of this very well-known study by Frey and Osborne, The Future of Employment, How Susceptible Are Jobs to Computerization? And this is a study done by scholars, I think, from Oxford that have looked at what is the likelihood that professions disappear or will be replaced by machines, and accountants and auditors are here in this study with 94% likelihood gonna be replaced. And of course, that's one view of things, but from my field research, I have studied a global technology company, one that we know, it's from the US. It is a search engine that we often use. And this company I have followed for more than a decade. And during this time, this company has grown enormously. So it means it hired thousands of people per year. It had years where it acquired 100 companies, and it created new products and services. And this is another form of high uncertainty, because this means an accountant who typically is in a very stable, relatively stable environment is in an extremely changing and dynamic environment. And I had the opportunity to study these accountants. So I pursued interviews with them, from the chief accountant to the corporate controller to many accountants in different areas, but particularly also financial accountants and compliance specialists. So the overall time is from 2007 to 2019, but the focus of the study is particularly during this time. And what the interest was is performance measurement, because what changed in this organization was that the management, the executive said, also support functions like accounting need to show that they are productive and need to measure themselves. So there was a performance measurement, and they set very tough targets to these accountants. They said, you as accountants need to become 10 to 20% more productive every year, and show that also in performance measures. So that's a real stretch target. And well, to make a long story short, what they did in the end was, to make this possible, they didn't hire new people internally that were expensive, right? So they kept the headcount of accountants relatively flat, while at the same time the company was growing and more work came into the organization. And that means for those accountants, they had no other way than to innovate. They had to innovate processes, they had to outsource, automate, and remove processes. And that's something we studied. And that is published in Accounting Review as actually, when you see the title, you don't see immediately that this is about accountants, because we framed it in a way that, because our interest was in how is it possible that people can innovate and be creative under high pressure. And that's the theoretical focus of the paper, but behind it, in principle, are accountants that actually innovate. And that's what you see when you look at the empirical section of this paper. And the empirical section of that paper also shows here what has happened. So it is graph senior managers that set up these targets, the performance measures. And for the employees in the department, this meant that they had to eliminate redundant work, stabilize, outsource, and then in-house accountants would focus only on the high-risk processes that they would conduct themselves, and all the other things would be outsourced as typically done in outsourcing. But they had some effects here. And now back to the COVID crisis. In this survey by Boston Consulting Group, it shows also what CFOs expect from this situation. So many, 68% see a demand shock, but also 85% of those CFOs see opportunities rising. If they look at what are the financial impacts on the left side here, you see 87% expect sales to decrease, 44% expect profits to decline by more than 20%, 15% have significant cash constraints. Then what do the CFO think how this is going to be developed, this crisis? So in that survey here, they are relatively, well, however you want to see it, positive. 51% thinks that it will recover quite soon, 25% see more of an L shape. And then on the right side, you see 81% of CFOs have a task force to deal with the situation. And nearly all of them work on working capital optimization, company-wide cost reduction, and CapEx reduction. And now I am showing this also is this last point here is CFOs plan for cost reductions in their function. And what they do is what we kind of show in our study, process optimization, new ways of working, and digitization in the actual accounting and finance function. So improving this. Good, so from this, what are the implications for accounting then from digital technologies? We can see accountants are under pressure to innovate, need to adapt and be flexible. They need to automate, augment accounting and compliance processes, require to efficiently manage outsourcing and to develop a broader skill set, which means they need to become programmers partially, trainers of outsourcers, and also do well in monitoring. There is also pressure to legitimize their work and measure their own performance. So time tracking, stretch targets is something we saw that they need to do. However, what our study shows, and I mean, these are accountants in a company that is very much pushing the digital era. And when those accountants are asked, they would say, it's definitely not going to happen that accountants disappear so quickly. There is much judgment needed. There is just a different type of skill needed. And I think that's what also in practitioner reports is shown. So that was the first question. Now the second question is the implications for management control systems from high uncertainty and from digital technologies in this situation. And I think a key problem here for management control systems in this time of high uncertainty is that companies can struggle with bureaucracy. So they have structures that are fixed, decision-making processes that are very slow, and they struggle to really adapt quickly to the threats and also opportunities that are in their environment. So therefore, a key problem here for management control systems is how to make this happening. And another problem that is currently there is, well, you see, how much do you want to plan and predict if the environment changes so quickly? So if you have many different scenarios, but they help to some extent, of course, but more and more you kind of need them to make is a question in how far planning and prediction is useful when the environment is very turbulent. And another aspect for management control that has become very important in the recent months is, well, we work from home and companies have much more this virtual work, and this creates different performance setting, different types of controls when people are not visibly seeing each other. So this creates new ways of how does communication technology then affect management control systems. And in this area, I have with a colleague, Peter Pida from Tampere University, and also with David Otley, a study on a global communication technology company who has successfully pursued the disruption of the global communication market. So we have followed this company and I've done 42 interviews in the last several years on following this company. We have also documents about how they do. And basically we started with the interest is how does an organization move fast and flexible to disrupt the global market, and what kind of management control systems are needed? That was our interest. Now what we saw then relatively soon is that the company used a communication platform, basically its own, with chat and video, and integrated that into its control system. And this created for this company a very particular control design, which we have analyzed in detail. And that helped this company also to overcome some bureaucracy. It made it possible for it to decide very quickly. And it also made it possible to work across time and space, so to be in that way very flexible. That's what we looked at, and we analyzed this company then also based on the idea of control packages. That's something that is more and more looked on in the management control literature. We should not just focus on one control mechanism, but it is important that we look at the combination of different controls, because they interrelate, or when they combined, they create certain procedures. So that's this very well-known discussion for those in management control with Malmi and Brown. This paper also, Ferreira and Otley have a control framework, and there is at the moment a special issue in AOS that is in process, where it is all about you shouldn't look at controls in isolation, but in combination. And that's also something that we looked at actually in our study that I talked about before. So something that comes out in this study for us is there is one problem, is the bureaucracy problem, that things are too slow in many companies and therefore we need to speed up. But another issue is also if you have too much speed, it is also a problem. And I think this is bringing me back to what I discussed before. Judy Weichmann calls this the time pressure paradox of the digital age. And that means actually digital technologies should free us out. We should have more time and feel relaxed. But the reality is that we are much more interrupted, that we have maybe difficulty on finding time to in-depth do something, that there is a demand of speeding up with everything, and that also then multitasking is often asked, and that it's difficult to combine, let's say, work life and private life, family life, and so on. So therefore, we see here new control problems that we discuss and work on in this paper. So these are some developments for management control systems. And now I would like to go to the third question. And this third question is about implications for emerging countries or markets. And in this area, I have a field study going on which relates to the time actually when I was in the US to the Garwood Center of Corporate Innovation at the University of California, Berkeley. That's particularly Henry Chesbrough, who has founded this term open innovation, and also his colleague Solomon Darwin, with whom I'm working quite intensely. So he has an initiative. He is originally Indian and grew up in a rural village in a very poor state, let's say. And he then, I think when it's with 17 years old, he got to the US, and for him opened a new world. It was particularly because his father managed to go to the US, and in the US he became first CFO and then also an academic. So he is now the executive director of that center. Now, over time, what he developed is first research on, and especially practice on, smart cities, and this moved then into smart villages. And smart villages, that's an idea that you can combine digital technologies that organizations, large organizations, small organizations, especially Silicon Valley companies, they use, because that's the network in Berkeley, in this area. And those companies can go into rural areas and co-innovate with the government and with rural villagers that are very poor, basically. And the idea of this is that both can benefit from this, because on the one hand, the villager who might have actually some skills or even some products that might be of interest for the wide world, they have no access to these markets to sell it. And through this smart village movement, there is a possibility that they get access to those markets. And at the same time, these large companies, they can provide a small innovation. And because it's, let's say, India, which is a huge market, they can then easily scale that. So they have kind of a business opportunity here, because if this small product that on an individual level might just have very limited margins, due to the scaling of the large market, they see a business opportunity. And so smart village movement means a community empowered by digital technologies and open innovation platforms to access global markets. And this is basically administered through academics, but then in combination, they bring together government, technology companies and other companies, villagers, to create this. So that's something I have been following in a field study. So there have been field trips to India, to 4 states in India where this happens, and particularly in one state this has now been active. And the empirical data is meetings, observations, and interviews with the different parties. So there are chief ministers of these Indian states involved, and practitioners and all kinds. So there is a lot of data on this. And the interest at this moment is particularly to understand how is it possible that you can incentivize different parties to collaborate and co-innovate in a market where there is none. So normally you would not think we go into a poor rural area, or also in a city, if you think, where poor people live, and we can actually benefit. But this is a way of thinking how to actually economically make it possible that there is a market to be created. And another interest in here is the social entrepreneur. So what is the role of, what does it need actually to combine those different parties in such an initiative? And of course, the digital technology is here at the center. So this area of research is a follow-up, because we had before, together with Sarah Check, who is in entrepreneurship, and with Solomon Darwin, we have studied innovation managers, managers that participate in the Berkeley Innovation Forum. This is a forum for innovation managers to exchange ideas on how they can create an innovation that is collaborating with other companies instead of just closing the innovation inside the company. So it's this paradigm that maybe many of you are familiar with. The traditional view is you have a research and development and you close the company. Nobody should see what's happening so that nobody can steal the idea. But because we live in a world where everything goes so fast and we need to innovate so much, open innovation then means that companies and managers co-innovate, sometimes with competitors or with across the industry to create new things. And in this paper, we were interested in how innovation managers convince others in the organization that open innovation is an important aspect or that such initiatives should be pursued. And we did that with 18 companies. And what we found was that, well, depending on the support for open innovation from especially the CEO, the top management, but also how the culture of the organization was, that depending on that, they would use different performance indicators. So financial indicators or non-financial indicators to legitimize their initiatives. And we have in this paper then distinguished different conditions that those managers had and also theorized how they would go about, and we theorized that as abstaining, initiating, expanding, and restructuring. So that's in this first study here. And now we kind of continue on this open innovation, but open innovation more in the rural area and in an area of emerging markets to see how innovation, open innovation especially, can be used in a positive way for uplifting also rural areas. What are then some of the insights that we already have? Well, digital technologies can facilitate the alleviation of poor rural communities. An example here, just that it's a bit more concrete what this actually means. So one such innovation is that in the northeast of India, there is a rainforest and sometimes difficult to reach those areas. And one company has a drone that can fly quite far, and another company has a health box that contains a vaccination. Now, if there is a situation that people can't be reached, they can actually combine this with this drone and the vaccination can be delivered to those remote rural places. Or other things are like education, educate the people through digital tools so that they can even get a degree and work in a company remotely, or then there are other possibilities. Another problem that we see is, well, it's complex. Of course, it is very complex because you have those different parties that have different interests. There are political interests involved, company interests. Villagers are also need to be convinced because they can also see a threat or they are worried that they are exploited. So therefore, it needs to be economically feasible for everybody involved and also socially feasible. And overall, I think the key that it works is a certain degree of political stability. If there is no political stability, it's nearly impossible to do it. So we see this in the smart village movement. It needs, at least in this area, for example, a chief minister that strongly supports this. So that was the third question about how digital technologies can change things and also the areas of high uncertainty. What are some implications for research from this? So I think from my perspective now and the type of research I'm doing, I think times of high uncertainty require partially new theory because things change. And if you think about it, how we can go about research, on the one hand, we have deductive studies that test hypotheses and theories, and they look for statistical generalization. And this requires setting of hypotheses at the beginning of the approach of the study and then keep them fixed during the inquiry. And this, of course, creates a certain stability in theory. It creates strength of theories. because they are statistically validated. But then there is also the other side, and this is the research that I perform and many other qualitative researchers do, and they do either abductive research or inductive research. And we know abduction is a process where theory and empirics are iteratively applied, which means we have an idea before we go to the field what we think we're going to see. Then we go to the field and we see there is something totally different. And then we have to think back, is that already theorized or is this not theorized? And based on that, we then go back and forth to create an explanation for what we see theoretically. And this creates new ideas, propositions, and hypotheses. And that's a key distinction in research that I think for many mainstream researchers, it is a bit obscure that research questions are changed along the process. But from an abductive study, this is the most normal process that we need to go through because this creates new theoretical patterns. So therefore, the process is a bit different, but we believe very much that actually the two approaches can profit from each other. If you have good theory, then you will also have better hypotheses and studies to be tested. And I think an example for this is also that many theories that we, for example, use in management accounting have been developed in the late 1980s, let's say Simon's levers of control or others, which are very useful theories, but the time in that way has changed, and I think that requires also new theory. So that's something we also tried to say in this study in the accounting review, which is a qualitative case study. We said at the end, the abductively derived findings present important theoretical implications that can be further tested and refined, possibly through other methods such as experiments or surveys, and then mobilizing the three basic psychological needs for autonomous motivation. Future research could examine the nuances of different control environments and so on, and how those affect employee creativity and productivity. And it goes on. But what I want to say with this is, well, actually research, qualitative research, and also quantitative research or deductive and abductive research could profit much more from each other than it actually does at the moment. And in research also, then this process of abduction means that we have to adapt sometimes, we have to go back because it's an iterative process between theory and empirics and how we write this up. It is not so straightforward as a deductive study where we can set the hypotheses and test them. But what we similarly do also in qualitative research, at least if we take an explanatory qualitative research approach, we try to find this, what we explain, and then think of what explains this, and that means the empirics that we use and the theory that we use. So in that way, there is quite a lot of similarity also. So that's something about research and implications for practice. I think during this crisis that is now there will, in many places, will be cost cutting a big topic because you need to save. And when we think of cost cutting, there are two ways which these trees shows. So one is you can top the tree, which is like you cut off some of the branches, and you can otherwise also trim the tree, and that looks like on the right side. And it's clear when you use this crisis to cut a lot, let's say, bureaucracy in your organization, it's for practitioners, then it makes more sense, obviously, to use the right side, because after the crisis, the tree will flourish again, while if you top the tree, things will be destroyed. And I think that's a kind of a good metaphor to think about in this. Good, so that was my presentation. Talked about the implications for accounting, and that accounting, at least in my view, will, from these studies, evidence that we have, will change, and there will be new tasks, but it will not immediately disappear, at least. Management control systems, we have seen many differences that are there. Bureaucracy is a problem. Communication technology will have its effect, and of course also other technologies that can be used. Then implications for emerging countries. We see actually digital technologies provide also opportunities to go into markets where there is none. And the final point was that both deductive and also abductive and inductive research is important at this time. And to close this, I think many people also in Brazil will have very difficult time and have maybe big problems going through this COVID time. So not everybody can see this in a very optimistic way, I understand that, but in general, I think Winston Churchill, who went through the Second World War, said, never let a good crisis go to waste. So maybe there are many opportunities also with all these threats, and those can be used. Good, then here, that's my part from here. If there are any questions, happy to answer.
Okay, thank you so much, Ian, for your so interesting presentation with a lot of fresh topics that make us thinking and rethinking so many things. So it's a broad picture in this challenging time that we also can, in this way, follow interesting topics in research area and also in different perspectives. Okay, I following the chat room during your presentation, and we have so interesting discussion over here, and I want to pick up some questions and comments. The first one, it's related to your point that you stressed about accounting as a profession. It generates a lot of discussion on chat. So I want to hear more from you, your perspective about if this is a situation of substitution or a transformation of the accounting as a profession, and how can we reinvent accounting as a relevant profession? Which new roles should accountants be prepared to take in the future? Are the comments from Silvia, Casanova, and also Mary, David, Lemos. So what are your thoughts about this discussion?
Thank you for this question. Well, I guess it depends also what we talk about when we about what type of accountant. So is it a financial accountant or more management accounting oriented? Of course, in practice, this differentiation is not always so clear because often they do both. But I think, so what I try to say is that at the moment, this digitalization is there, and there is also a bit of a hype to say now everything is going to change immediately. And of course, there are lots of technologies that make things simpler and that can replace many tasks. But that accounting as such is still very important for any company, right? Because it basically shows the bottom line and the top line of what is happening. And in that sense, an accountant will be needed in the future, quite surely. And in terms of changes, well, there is of course also this other profession, the data scientists, and that accountants and data scientists, there might be in the future some mixture between these professions. And I think another aspect is that, at least in this company where I study these accountants quite detailed, is, well, there is more demand on accountants on their skill level. They need to be communicative, so they need to be early involved in the business processes. So when the operations go and do new businesses, they need to be there to really see what's going on and understand that, and also to make business aware of the risks that are involved in this. So that's something. And of course, they become also very much risk managers in that sense, and programmers. So, but the skill set is broader. So accountant is definitely even further a demanding profession, I think, in the future. More demanding profession. And that's kind of what has happened in the last 30 years already. And from the management accountant, I think there will be always analysis and these aspects involved.
Yeah, and actually related to this more management accounting perspective, Fabio Fresati, who is the head of FEUSP, he questioned if how to balance the people issues and object ones, because we as in accounting world have the tradition with the second one, but a weak tradition when you think about the first one, to look more to the people. And we can think this question in a sense of profession, but also in terms of research. What are your thoughts in this point?
So I'm not sure if I understand the question right. So the question is, on the one hand, accountants are by profession very objective focused, but less people oriented. And what this means for the future for researchers, let's say.
Yeah.
Yes, so I think that what we see how the profession changes and the skill set that accountants need shows that they need to be more people oriented, because this is what machines can't do, right, in the same way. So accountants need to be involved with the business and to be involved with them and to understand what the risks are and what the business actually is going to do, and that they share this information. Accountants need to be people oriented very much. So I think that way it goes into this combination. And I think that goes into the research side like this, that we should focus more on that, and also on the actual side, on the practice.
Okay, great. And also related to the discussion, we have here Claudio Vanderlei, that he is stressing out that for human beings in general, it's very hard to deal with uncertainties, in particular in the economics and accounting field. What is the influence of previous experiences and in responding to a new environment? And in other words, if you have some specific thoughts that in management accounting, we are relying too much on well-known frameworks, such as the level of control from Simons, for example, and that may not couple with this new world in business. Could you explore more about this and the role of abductive studies in refreshing these frameworks, models, and theories in general?
Yeah, so I think the second point, that's what I tried to say at the end of my presentation, that I think we need to be aware that we use theories that have been developed a long time ago, and that these theories are, of course, very important theories because that's why they are replicated so many times. But that in that way, research that also creates new theory and therefore is more explorative and abductive is very important in these times, so that we think of, is it really, let's say, if you use this example of Simon's framework, is there such a clear differentiation now only with diagnostic versus interactive, that you use interactive controls in strategic uncertainties? What does this then mean if we have high uncertainty? So high uncertainty, and we have these environments where so many things change at the same time and therefore affect many areas also of an organization. Therefore, what does that mean? Is then interactive control enough, or could we actually explore this deeper, go on, and also theorize new? I think these questions are very much, yes, support in a sense that both is needed, and I think both deductive researchers and inductive or abductive researchers could profit from this, because generally research would get more new knowledge. And I think now in this time of COVID, there is so much happening where in different companies you see these uncertainties, and I think that offers many opportunities to see what is actually happening rather than be kind of just at this point write a survey of suspecting what's actually happening, because maybe we don't know what's happening in all these companies right now. So it's difficult to write a survey at the beginning. Rather, we need to know what's happening and then develop this.
Yeah. Okay. And also, Ian, we have here a question from Professor Fernanda. And she, first of all, she thanks for this discussion about innovation, hyper-automatization. And she asked if is there a trajectory of qualitative critical studies on the perspective of the accountant as a workers, and if you have any guidance on this topic, that would be very welcome.
So whether there is a possibility, if I understand it right, for the accountant as a critical worker to study this more, well, I think, so if I understand the question right, there is much to do from a critical perspective, in the sense of looking at what do these new assumptions bring for the accountant, and how to assess this profession, what it needs to bring. So I think there are many possibilities in this direction. And of course, there is much research going on already on this in critical perspectives on accounting, on the accountant and on the future of the accountant. And I think a key paper, of course, especially with digitalization in this regard, is the one by Patrone, where he points out the possibilities, for example, for management accounting. How will the future look like? Will the accountant become wiser through the digital age, and what are the implications of this?
Great. And also related to this kind of topic that you addressed in your presentation, Professor Fernanda, during the presentation, she commented that in some way it could be complex to treat innovation through the lens of market inclusion. There is a whole critical literature included here in Brazil on based of pyramid strategies. It reproduces an European American idea that social development is market inclusion. As an interpretative researcher, as you are, what are your thoughts about this? And if we can, for example, understand this as inclusion in a capitalist logic. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's very difficult to answer this, because so what I saw in India is one initiative which was an infrastructure initiative, and the other one, this that I talked about with this co-innovation. So if you look at, and that's I think something that is well known, if you look at an infrastructure initiative, then there is an investment by some investors, and they do something in these villages, and a few months later they visit this village again, and all that has been invested is not anymore there, or it has been abandoned. And what this initiative that I'm talking here about tries to do is to involve the villagers and to empower them. And that means there is more of an involvement, and they are heard, and that's the role actually of this academic body, to make sure, because it is of course the risk that there is exploitation happening, and also that the social capital in those villages and in those rural areas actually gets destroyed by these companies. But that's why it is a combination of government, who has a political interest and also a political reputation and capital, and the university or various universities that are involved, that kind of balance this out and make it happen. But what it also shows is that as we operate in a capitalist system, it's very difficult to use another way than actually a capitalist approach to make incentives for all of them. So all of those parties, I think they have a social interest in improving the life of these people, but usually there is an economic interest from all sides that is important. to consider. So the villagers, they want to see some benefit, and the government wants to see a benefit. The companies want to see at least a future return of this, and also the university wants to is of course a social impact that is there. But it is a difficult situation, and I think it's a very great question.
Good, thank you, Ian. And also, Professor Sylvia, she asked that, what are the opportunities of researching outside the companies? What are the boundaries, if any, of accounting research beyond the organizational world? Do you have some, I know you are conducting some research in this perspective, but what are your thoughts about this question?
Well, I think you can study accounting in all kinds of ways. Accounting is in so many different forms in organizations and also outside organizations. I think we all, as accounting researchers, if we have this lens on, we see accounting in everyday life, and therefore I don't see any problem in studying this. I think what we as field researchers are generally concerned about is to immerse into a certain setting, which means you try to be native of that to some extent. So you try to understand the meanings of people and whether these meanings are inside an organization or somewhere outside. It doesn't matter. It means just that you try to understand what is actually happening in those people's minds to some extent, even though it's difficult to do.
Okay, thank you so much, Ian. Our time is ending. It's close to end the section, so I think we could address a lot of questions. So I want to thank you again for your time, for your sharing your knowledge with us, and also thank you all our attendees that discuss and make comments and participate with this session. So thank you so much for being here in Congresso USP, and I hope to see you again around. Okay, see you.
Thanks so much. Thanks for inviting. It's been a pleasure.
You're welcome. Thank you so much for your presentation. And guys, see you again. Thank you so much for being here.